Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, March 28th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, fallout continues after ICE detained a Tufts University graduate student on the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts. Her name is Ramesa Ozturk. I think I got that right. And DHS says she was arrested for, quote, engaging in activities in support of Hamas. So, Tom, she co-authored this op-ed piece in the student newspaper urging the university to divest. But what do you make of this latest arrest by ICE of a student who apparently is in the country legally?
Well, yeah, this one is disturbing. I mean, if they have proof that she is agitating on behalf of Hamas, they need to produce it. You can't just take people off the street and put them in a van and disappear them. I mean, apparently her lawyer didn't even know where she was. She's been transferred to this ICE detainee facility in Louisiana, where she sits. No charges have been filed. And again, I don't know that you need charges to deport someone here who's on a visa. Marco Rubio spoke to this again, and he spoke to it, I think, very effectively. However, he did allege in his remarks, he alluded to the fact that there was more than this op-ed. He said, this isn't just about writing an op-ed when you're supporting Hamas. Like, okay, that's great, but where's the evidence? Because if they don't have evidence, I think they've overstepped here. If they do, then I think they're going to be much more in the they'll have much more leeway with the public. But the idea that, and this was captured on surveillance, and that's one of it. These ICE agents walk up and grab this woman, and they talk to her, and it's not like they threw her in a van and drove away. But still, it's not something that Americans are comfortable with. Unless and until the administration can bring forth the evidence that she really is a bad actor who is here and needs to be out of the country.
Yeah. Well, full disclosure, Carl, I'm a Tufts alumni. That makes me a jumbo. We're the Tufts jumbos. I know the streets of Somerville and Medford well. It's shocking video, I will say that. What did you make of it?
Well, a couple of things. Tom says that, they better have evidence. And I want to talk about that for a moment because, I don't know quite what the law is here. Yeah, they have to have evidence, but do they have to show it to us? Do we have to see it publicly? Americans have a right to a speedy trial, a public trial. That's in the Constitution. But if what you're doing is simply revoking someone's visa, do you have to show your cards? I think it would be in the public interest if they did that, because all we know, all that's in the public record about this woman, I believe she's 30, is that she a year ago co-wrote an op-ed. Yeah, I read the op-ed today, and it's full of the kind of bile and gibberish that really drove me crazy after Israel was attacked. Israel's starving people, Israel's committing genocide, all this crap that they're taught on these campuses. But she expressed her opinion. She expressed it respectfully, and she was urging the university to be stronger in its condemnation of Israel. She had 3 co-authors. Now, I think her name's first, but one of the co-authors has a name that I was able to Google him. He's a young male student from the United States. Another one was a woman, Hispanic name, another woman. Now, she is a Hispanic name. I'm not going to say it on the air, but she could be 3rd generation Somerville, Andy, right? I mean, right. Or she could be a Dominican student, in which case she's probably in hiding now. The 4th name was an Arabic or Islamic name. But again, it'd be a person who's been in this country as long as my relatives have been in this country, or it could be another foreign student. And the question now that if this was all there is, the question you have before the courts is, and I think this is going to be the question the Supreme Court's going to have to decide: if people are here legally, do they have the same rights as Americans? And if not, what level of rights less do they have? Because they can't go arrest these other students if they're Americans for writing an op-ed. So I think the administration is going. Public opinion is going to turn on them. It's very popular to throw criminals out of this country illegally. It is not popular to round up students who've written an op-ed you don't like. And they're going to have to make the case that this woman actually was supporting Hamas or doing other activity that meant that they could revoke her visa. And even there, I think they should explain, and I think we should call on them to explain, we in the media, why they couldn't just, send her a letter, have her tell the college, which was in the dark about this, her visa is being revoked. We're going to give you, we have our reasons, and we're going to wrap up things. She can't even stay till the end of the semester, but we're going to wrap this up in an orderly way. We have intelligence that thinks she shouldn't be in this country, and just do it in a more humane way. But just snatching someone while they're on their way to dinner, who've never been informed of anything, that's like Argentina in the 1980s. That's not America.
Yeah, I read the op-ed. It's in the Tufts Daily, which is a student paper up there, and I agree. It had some stuff in it that kind of drives you crazy. But overall, it was a very respectful letter asking the administration to sort of take the student body, which votes on this sort of thing, more seriously. It was pretty benign, I thought, as these things go, and certainly didn't rise to the occasion where you think it was supporting Hamas in any sort of material way that would lead to this sort of action. Tom, there's an economic aspect of this story too. NAFSA, which is this group that they advance international education. That's their idea. But they said in 2023, 1.1 million international students in the U.S. contributing $44 billion to the U.S. economy, supporting 378,000 jobs. So for the universities, those numbers may be inflated. I don't know. But sizable, the student body population is right. And this would, you assume, sort of chill foreign students coming to the U.S. and would hurt the universities that rely on them for lots of tuition, right?
Absolutely. And I think some universities are probably already seeing that a little bit. And I think it is a concern from them. I'm not sure how much that they're going to win that in the battle of public opinion in terms of not having as many foreign students. I think there might be the public might actually be in favor of that. But to go back to what Carl said, I do think
Make it easier to get into Harvard.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. More spots for Americans. I mean, now universities, a lot of these foreign students, they pay full freight and all of that. And so
do they ever?
Yeah, exactly. So they're a real cash cow. And there's also the argument that, look, this is a form of American soft power. We bring these people in, we educate them. A lot of them stay here. Maybe they go back to their countries and become, leaders and part of the elite. And therefore they have an affinity and an understanding of America that they wouldn't otherwise have if they didn't go to university here. So that's another component of it. But back to what Carl said, I mean, I think this is the public opinion here is so key, right? Because Carl might be right, and I'm not an expert on this in terms of what the law is and what the administration needs or doesn't need to revoke somebody's visa. I mean, apparently, I think they can do it at will if they want to. But to Carl's point, like again, kicking criminals out of the country. Huge support for that. They're going to have a lot of leeway there. They can make some mistakes. If they correct them, I don't think there's going to be, but this is different. This is a different kettle of fish because of the way it was conducted. And again, not knowing what's going on, not informing the public, it invites, I think, critics, number one, to come in and say that, get after the administration on this. And they're not going to have public support for this unless and until they can prove that, again, this woman was somehow a bad actor. Writing an op-ed should not, in my opinion, be enough to revoke someone's visa. Because to your point, it wasn't even like she was, the op-ed was pretty tame by standards. She wasn't inciting violence. She wasn't doing anything. So this is one for the administration where I think they're going to end up if they don't respond and provide some transparency and some information on why this is happening, that they're going to end up on the wrong side of this from a public relations and public opinion standpoint.
Yeah. Well, Carl, I do want to talk about different foreign policy story. I guess kind of a foreign policy story, and that's Elise Stefanik of New York. Congresswoman is no longer headed to the UN. nomination was recalled, and she joked about it on Thursday. She said the good news is that she can continue speaking out now. She's no longer under consideration for the post. So, Carl, what happened? Did she just have a change of mind and decided she really had to get back to Congress where her heart desired?
Well, what we suspect, and I don't know the answer, we got to get her on this radio show and ask her directly, is that they were starting to be nervous about the majority in the House, this very thin majority. We talked about this yesterday. Tim Walz is now the national security advisor. That's a seat in Florida that has not yet been filled, and it's a close race. They lost Matt Gaetz, and his seat has not yet been filled. It will be. I can't think those seats are going to be Democratic, but you never know. And the governor of New York's been playing games with Elise Stefanik's seat, and it was going to be vacant until October. So I think they're sort of, calling the troops home, and it's like reservists. Yeah. Get your rifle and get to your post. That's what I think happened.
Tom, what do you make of this? And, the idea that the governor of New York would sort of play games so that her district would be unrepresented, in New York, in Congress. That seems like dirty pool to me. What do you think?
Yeah, that's not what, a leader of a state should be doing. But look, Trump had a True Social post on this and basically said what Carl said, which is, he needs every vote he can get to keep his agenda moving forward. And they are nervous about having a slim majority in the House. And so, I guess you could take this might be an omen that maybe the United States is going to kick the UN out, withdraw from the UN. We don't need a UN ambassador.
You mean like the Carrie Lake appointment to
close the door
to an agency you want to demolish?
Yeah. Well, we'll watch. Her district, New York 21, is apparently more of a swing district. It's not as safe as the two Florida districts, one of which is up next week, as we talked about yesterday. So we'll see. This may be a smart move on the part of the White House to keep their majority, however slim it is, in Congress. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Tom, Fox News had a scoop yesterday. They dedicated almost the entire 6 p.m. show to an interview by Bret Baier of Elon Musk and senior members of DOGE. There were 7 guys on the set in addition to Musk, and they were all guys. But the acting administrator, Amy Gleason, was nowhere in sight. Tom, lots of red meat in the interview about waste and abuse. So let's start there. What were your impressions?
Well, you're right. They are the DOGE bros. They were all dudes. But also, and look, this is clearly a follow-on from Laura Ingram's interview the other night when she brought in, along with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, this guy, Sam Korsak or something, where he talked about things he had found at the IRS, how outdated the systems were, the computer systems, and that was a huge, I think, PR win for the administration. And so they replicated that here, giving Bret Baier this exclusive, not just with Elon Musk, but with all of these other folks who are DOGE members that are, embedded in these different agencies, to come forth and basically, reassure, tell people the stories they found about fraud. B, reassure them that they're not doing anything nefarious. They're not in there digging through your personal data. And C, to humanize these people, to actually, you look at these guys and you think, oh, well, one of them's like the CEO of Airbnb, and another one's like he's an actual rocket scientist. These are not partisan, ideologues, hardcore ideologues that are in there to be like, Project 2025. We got to, they're like, one guy's like, I'm a software engineer. I'm looking at the code. I'm trying to make it more efficient, more better, for the people, Social Security recipients and the like. So, and I think they, by and large, accomplished that, because you watch that interview and you listen to these guys speak and you realize, they don't need to be doing this. They're all coming in, they're successful in their private fields, and they're coming in because they feel like it's a really important mission to save the federal government from going bankrupt. And again, I think that generally has widespread support. So I think it was if you're a fan of DOGE, this was a PR win for them.
Yeah, it did sort of reverse the impression somewhat. I think that they were like, there's these 20-year-old geeks who are down there sort of like combing through. I mean, it's a pretty impressive bunch of executives, all well-spoken. The story that struck me, they pointed out that there's 4.6 million credit cards for the federal government, and there's only 2.3 million employees. So one of their things, and you can follow it on the site, is they're going through and culling through all these credit cards that are sort of just floating out there. Carl, what'd you make of it? And do you think it was important too that Amy Gleason wasn't there because she's supposed to be in charge?
I didn't know the significance of that, but I noticed it. Andy, I was struck by that credit cards thing too. It reminded me of my old days as a police reporter. These young newspapers, you do see stories about, vice squad corruption or something. And then you have a little story sometime about, the vice squad or the detective squad says it spent, $800 a month on coffee. And this is, a unit with 4 people. And this is 30 years ago. And you realize, and their phones would ring off the hook and people would say, they can't spend that money on coffee. They're stealing it. That's too much money. And it was like a throwaway line that your editor didn't even necessarily want you to include in the story, but people related to it. And I thought that credit card example, and there were others, were things that people can relate to, because President Trump has been unpersuasive. He goes on about the people, the thousands of people, the millions of people who are 200 are getting Social Security. Nobody even believes those examples. They think that they're misreading the data, and so they put it down there. Like I like to say, where the goats can get it, where people can understand we really are talking about waste in the government. And these guys are really committed to doing something about it. And the Democrats who've been criticizing them were uninterested in that. The other thing I'll say is that, the Democrats have said I thought this private security thing was a red herring. The Democrats, I've said this before, they must think it worked because they must have done focus groups because they keep mentioning it. And I thought this was designed to assure you that these people are not interested in doing that, and that's not what they're doing. So I think, when you're doing radical change or even abrupt change that's not radical, you do need to bring the public opinion along with you. You need to explain what you're doing and why. And I don't think they've done an adequate job of that, but they're starting to. And I don't know who's persuading them that. I suspect Susie Wiles, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the things they talked about, Tom, was that Musk is actually there on this 130-day work permit, I guess. Mm-hmm. He's a special government employee. And he was asked about that, and he said, I think we will have accomplished most of the work required to reduce the deficit by $1 trillion within that time frame. That just struck me as, A, hard to believe, but B, if true, pretty amazing.
Yeah. No, and there was a question about, like, look, are you going to renew? How's this going to work? Are you going to stay on? Or are you really going to be done at 130 days? And he kind of left it open, like, I think we'll be done by then, so it's not going to be an issue. But and he talked about they're trying to do $4 billion a day. Cut $4 billion a day, every day, 365 days a year. And if they do that, they get to their goal of decreasing the deficit by half. And when you listen to the stories that people were telling, and of all the fraud and waste that they're coming across, and they all said the same thing. It's the same thing that the guy from IRS said, is they're optimistic that they're going to get there because they are finding a lot of fraud, and B, there are good employees on the ground that have been trying to do these things, but have been basically prevented from doing these modernizations. They've never had the authority. The bureaucracy's just been too ossified and too thick. And so they all seemed very positive that, I suppose that was part of the gig, last night, but they really did seem genuinely encouraged that they could get this done. And if they did, that would be a huge, huge win. And I agree with Carl. I think they could have done a better job in the beginning of sort of prepping the American people for this. And I also think if they do get this done, and the Democrats have done nothing but stand in the way and nitpick and get out and try and slander these guys as being thieves and all this stuff, they're going to end up in a bad spot. I think they would have done themselves, and still can, by the way, do themselves a favor by getting on board and saying, yes, we want to be part of this. We want to help you. We just want to do it in a way that's more bipartisan, that is more methodical, and is more inclusive of the prerogatives of Congress.
Andy, can I add one point to that very briefly?
Yeah.
So President Trump inherits a $2 trillion annual deficit in peacetime. It's crazy. We'd gotten away from talking about that. We were talking about, is he Hitler? Is Biden senile? Important things, but if they really cut if they cut $1 trillion off of what would have been added to the federal debt
without cutting critical services, which is what Elon was saying,
without cutting critical services, from discretionary spending, I think then you create the environment where they can say in a year, all right, look what we did. But now we're going to address entitlements. We're going to be very careful. We're going to do this, though, in a way that actually balances the budget. I don't think the American people are stupid or selfish. I think if these guys could show they could really do that, if they could really cut the deficit in half by getting rid of waste, I think they would have some cachet to then address the real problem, which is these runaway entitlements. And if you thought if this guy came in, he could balance the budget in 4 years, not pay off the debt, mind you, but balance the federal budget, that would be a hell of an accomplishment. And I think American people would recognize that.
Yeah, well, I tell people this all the time. They should go to the DOGE website if you haven't. It's really worth checking out because it's a running tally of stories about how they've where they found something and they've cut this much here and there. It's kind of it's amusing and interesting, and it gives you a pretty good scorecard, including the amount of money saved per U.S. taxpayer by DOGE so far. I think it's around $850 right now is what they're claiming.
And
so
some of the stories they were telling last night about, they've got 27 different CIOs in the health services department and 41 different communications officers. And there's a lot of fat to be trimmed still. And the other thing is Elon Musk went out of his way to say, listen, with regards to Social Security, we're actually going to make it more effective and efficient for people, and they'll get paid more, not less. And he was pretty adamant about that.
Yeah. The other point they made, which I think rang true, or at least for me, is how none of these computer systems talk to one another. And if you've ever tried to run an organization where the computers don't talk to one another, it's almost impossible. You can just imagine at the federal level, every agency, even within agencies, they have computers they can't communicate. And for all these Silicon Valley guys, that just must be driving them nuts. Carl, are you a DOGE fan? You got 30 seconds here. Are you feeling better about DOGE?
I'm still agnostic. I'm old enough to have covered Ronald Reagan's many speeches against waste, fraud, and abuse. I personally covered Al Gore and Bill Clinton's REGO, which is reinventing government. I think Elaine Kmart found about $3.6 billion in federal waste, which sounded like a lot of money back then. So I'm open-minded, but I want to wait and see.
You keep using the word agnostic. I do not think it means what you think it means, Carl.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. But don't go away. When we come back, I'm going to talk to historian Tevi Troy about historical precedents for the week just passed at the White House. It might make some people at the White House feel a little better about what they've been through. They're not alone. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by presidential historian Tevi Troy. He's the author of The Power and the Money, the epic clashes between commanders-in-chief and titans of industry. He's written several other books as well. Tevi, welcome back to the program.
Andy, thanks for having me. I always enjoy being on the show, and I always enjoy Real Clear Politics.
Great. Well, it's Friday, so it's a good time to get a bit of a historical perspective on the week just passed. So that's why I wanted to talk to you. You've got this new column out with the headline, "There's a Precedent for the White House Signal Chat Leak." and it's more than 100 years old. So I assume you wrote this to comfort Trump's national security team. So who else in our history has similarly screwed up?
Well, hold on. I didn't write it to comfort them. I just write things because I like to find historical precedents for whatever's going on. And so I say that while there have been precedents, there still should be investigated, and it still is a big screw up. But the first precedent I look to is in the Civil War, when General Lee's battle plans for invading the North were wrapped around a cigar box, and 2 Union soldiers found them and brought them to the Union general in charge, and that led to the Battle of Antietam and a Union victory, which then led to Abraham Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. So there have been leaks with White House implications going on for well over 150 years.
And that was General McClellan, right? Was the
General
Union
McClellan,
general?
who was famously slow to act.
Right.
And then when he saw this, he said, now I know what I must do. So finally, he was spurred to action by getting the other side's complete battle plan. That was the only thing that could get him to attack.
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't really give you much comfort if you were on the leaking side of that story, I guess. What about John F. Kennedy? Because you also write about him and the Washington Post.
Yeah, there's a great story that my friend, former White House speechwriter John McConnell, told me about, where Kennedy leaves a briefcase of documents that today would be classified with the publisher of the Washington Post, a guy named Philip Graham. And Graham gets these documents, and they have inside information about how the U.S. government views Charles de Gaulle, the French leader. And when Kennedy is asked about this, saying this is private information, he said, well, he has been good to me and good to this country. So implying that he wanted to do a nice favor for Phil Graham because of, I guess, their friendship. So yeah, it seems a little outrageous, but that's what happened.
And that was, of course, before Watergate and the other famous leaks that involved the Washington Post and the White House.
Right, and I use that as a lead-in to other famous Washington Post leaks, specifically the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times tried to print them, and then they were enjoined from doing so by the courts. But the Washington Post got them around the same time, and the Washington Post went forward, and then it was Katie barred the door. And again, these were leaks by a guy named Dan Ellsberg, who is in the national security establishment, who was disaffected, unhappy with the Vietnam War, and he leaked these papers. They didn't show current battle plans, but what they showed was the conversations inside the U.S. government in the period leading up to the Vietnam War, and a lot of skepticism inside the government about whether this was a good idea and whether we could carry it out. And obviously, despite all the skepticism, they kept going forward and forward, and 58,000 American boys lost their lives, which is a terrible tragedy. So it was embarrassing to the government. Interestingly, Nixon fought hard to keep them out, but it was mostly embarrassing to the Johnson and Kennedy administrations. But nevertheless, Nixon thought there was an important principle at work. But Nixon also was so outraged by the leak that he set up a unit in the White House to stop future leaks. Who do you call to stop a leak? The plumbers. So they named this group the plumbers, and the plumbers were, of course, the guys who botched the Watergate burglary, which led to another famous leak, which was the Watergate leaks that came from the mysterious person named Deep Throat. Now, when the Watergate stories were being reported by Woodward and Bernstein, people knew or assumed that there was a source, but nobody knew this concept of Deep Throat. Deep Throat only comes out in the book, All the President's Men, which they wrote after Nixon was no longer in office. And then this scramble, who is Deep Throat? Everyone wanted to find out, and it took almost 40 years until we found out who it was, a guy named Mark Felt, who again was a disaffected FBI agent who was passed over for the promotion to the top spot at FBI, and that's why he leaked all the material.
Yeah. Well, this week's scandal, I guess we could call it a scandal, that's fair. Very 21st century, though, because it involves a chat and a guy being Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, being invited inadvertently to this chat. Kind of fell in his lap, it sounds like, although I guess we'll may take 40 years, but we'll find out what really happened. It does seem like that part of it, I wonder, is there any precedent for that, where a reporter actually just sort of gets invited to a meeting or a session that he's not supposed to be at and ends up learning all sorts of stuff and then has it all, recorded on his phone and thus can sort of, deliver the goods when he's challenged about it.
So what I always say when people ask me for precedents is, I can't point to you when the exact same thing happened in the exact same way, but I can point to similar things that happened that remind one of this. So yeah, there are always times when reporters hear things they're not supposed to hear, are invited to things they're not supposed to be invited to. In fact, Jeffrey Goldberg in the New York Times podcast, when he was interviewed about this, he said, to a reporter, the most interesting thing in the world is what's going on behind a closed door.
Yeah.
Reporters spend all their time trying to get behind that closed door.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm talking to Tevi Troy. He's a presidential historian. He's the author of The Power and the Money, the epic clashes between commanders in chief and titans of industry. It's a great book, highly commended to people. Do you think anyone will be punished this time around for this? And again, what's the precedent there?
So in my piece, I actually go through whether somebody was punished in these circumstances, and usually not. Sometimes because they were never caught. Like, for example, the deep throat guy was never caught, right?
Mark Felt.
But the guy Daniel Ellsberg, who they knew was the source in the Pentagon Papers, he was caught and brought to trial, and the charges were dismissed. And then sometimes the wrong guy gets punished. So Richard Armitage was the guy who leaked the information about Valerie Plame during the run-up to the Iraq War, and they knew. Colin Powell and Armitage knew that he was the person who leaked it, and they knew he leaked it even as the White House and the Justice Department were investigating the scandal. They never spoke up, and Scooter Libby, who happens to be a friend of mine, was implicated in this, even though it was Armitage who did it. So Libby was punished, but it wasn't he who did the leaking.
Yeah. So I guess the latest twist on this is these Venmo payments. I don't know if you've up on this, but apparently Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, left his Venmo payments open so you could go on there and you could look at his 328 person list. This was found by Wired Magazine. One of the people on his list was Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and apparently her list was there as well. I mean, this is a kind of information that would be useful to anyone who's doing Oppo research, either on this inside the country or someone outside the country. I mean, do they have a problem at the White House, do you think, in terms of locking this kind of stuff down?
Look, first of all, it's basic operational security. I play tennis, and I have a friend who got my racket strung for me, and I Venmoed him the money, and I noticed that his Venmo payments were all open, and I said, you really should close that door. So I think in the 21st century, there are all kinds of ways that people can find out information about you, and you have to be really scrupulous in making sure that people can't see this information about you. But there's nothing nefarious about Wiles giving money to Susie Wiles. Maybe they went out for coffee, and in the White House, the ethics rules are very strict. You can't just buy somebody coffee, and because it could be potentially an ethics violation. So people are scrupulous about paying others back, but maybe you're scrupulous about that, but not scrupulous about closing the door of who you're being Venmoed to. So yeah, it's a crazy world.
Yeah, right. Well, as ever, Tevi, it's great to get your views. This is a great way to wrap up the week. I appreciate it. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I've been talking with Tevi Troy. I'm Andrew Walworth, and we'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and for our next segment, we've invited Charlie Stone, a contributor at RCP, to share his latest interview that he conducted for the RCP website. Charlie's guest is Michael Cohen. He was Donald Trump's personal lawyer for more than a decade, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2018 for crimes including campaign finance violations. So here's Charlie Stone in conversation with Michael Cohen.
I got to tell you, you are the most Shakespearean character, at least in the paradigm of if Shakespeare was writing about characters. You are Donald Trump's fixer. You said at one point you'd take a bullet for him. Now you call him a con man. You've obviously spent some time in the pokey. You're a convicted felon, like the president. When you reflect upon your life to date, what are some of the things that stand out? And what are you comfortable about, and what still makes you angry?
It's a multifaceted question. First and foremost, I was not joking when I said that I would have taken a bullet for him. I would have taken a bullet for him. He was not just my boss, he was my friend. The only issue is I wouldn't take a bullet if he was the one pulling the trigger. And that's exactly what he did. And why he listened to whoever it was. Now, according to my book, Revenge, which is, it was the #6 New York Times bestseller, but it was how Donald Trump weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. There were a slew of people who were around Trump who thought that the only way for Trump to get past all of the Russia situation was to basically cut me off, throw me under the bus. You don't throw the guy under the bus who is your protector. What you do is you throw your arms around them and you shield them, you protect them. The 11 allegations that were raised against me by the Steele dossier, that garbage document, were all inaccurate. Andrew Weissman turned over that file to the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, and that's where the story starts.
You said you weren't indicted, but obviously they were charging document because you pled, right?
Pled.
At some point.
I pled. There was an information, not a charging document.
So is Trump right with the Russian hoax? Like all of this at that particular time, right? They never found any sort of evidence of a Russian collusion with the Trump campaign or Donald Trump personally. Was he right about that?
Yeah. Well, to the extent that I have knowledge on, there was no Russian compromise. There were no phone calls and conversations other than the ones that I testified to. Yes, I called the Kremlin. There's a great story, by the way, Charlie, right? I did call the Kremlin. They asked me, what did you call the Kremlin for? I said, well, I called because at the time, Barack Obama and Putin were feuding, and Putin said that he was not going to see Obama when he was in town for the United Nations General Assembly, and or Obama wasn't going to invite Putin to the White House. So Trump turns around and says, I wonder if he'll come here, have a Mar-a-Lago burger with me downstairs at the grill. I said, I don't know, let's find out. That would be something, wouldn't it? Talk about a great publicity stunt. Two powerful leaders getting together at Trump Tower. So they said to me, really? So where did you get the number to the Kremlin? I'm sure that was the question you were going to ask me. How do you happen to have the number to the Kremlin? It's called Google. I literally Googled, what is the phone number to the Kremlin? And lo and behold, I called it. I have a request. I'm calling from the office of Donald J. Trump, the Trump Organization. And I speak just enough Russian that I was able to get that conversation out there.
And so just for context, when was this call that you called? When did you Google search, and then how quickly did you call? And
2016 was during the campaign.
When does it go off the rails with your friend? At what point are you thinking, I think he's cutting me dry here?
The last time I spoke with Trump was the day after the raid. It was like April 10th. And I couldn't understand that. Why was nobody reaching out? Then I'm watching on television a couple days thereafter, or a day or so thereafter, and he's sitting at a table, arms folded, the whole Trump look. And he says, it was just disgusting that they raided one of my attorneys' homes, law offices, and so on. He goes, it's just disgusting what they did. And I'm saying to myself, whoa. One of my attorneys? Now all of a sudden, I don't even have a first name. I'm the guy that he called every single day for over a decade at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I was the last phone call at night between 11 and 11:30, 7 days a week. Now all of a sudden I don't have a name. It's disgusting what they did. When I was first requested by SIPC, the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, I did not want to testify. So then they subpoenaed me. Trump got extremely angry. Why are you letting them subpoena you? It looks bad. It's a big story. It's a big story. He cared more about the press on it than he cared about what the ultimate results could be. And I begged him, just shut the shit down, right? Shut it down. You're the president of the United States. Nothing good is going to come out of this thing. And he said, I want you to testify. Well, when I went in and I testified and I gave truthful answers, except, of course, to The 1001 violation that I got, which was lying to Congress, lying to the Senate Permanent Select Committee. Charlie, do you know what that lie was that they charged me with? No? Ready for this one? They got me with 1001 violation based upon my response to the number of times that I claimed to have spoken to Trump about the failed Trump Tower Moscow real estate project. In the response, because Trump wanted, as always, stay on message, de minimis, use the number 3. The true answer was 10. That's what they got me on.
Now, you pled guilty around that, right? And you've indicated that you did that because of pressure that they were indicating they would indict your wife or bring charges against your wife. But did you ever balance that with, Trump's my friend, he's going to give me a pardon because I am doing his work and I'm trying to help him? Did that ever cross your mind?
Never thought about it that way. Once I had started the testimony, like with Sipsey, immediately thereafter, I was subpoenaed by HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And then as soon as that one finished, I ended up testifying before the Senate Judiciary. I mean, it didn't stop. You know, people remember the one House Oversight Committee hearing that I did before rest in peace, a good man, Elijah Cummings. I actually testified before Congress 7 times, 9 hours a clip. All right. In fact, the day that you all saw me live on television, the day before and the day after, I also testified before different agencies. Once I started testifying and once documentation was put forth, game was over.
When you went to prison, how often did you think about what went wrong? And what did you sort of mull about when you were spending time in prison?
How about every single second of every single day? You turn around and you're like, how? Why? Right? The stupidity. I never should have been charged. I ultimately got a 6-year sentence, 3 years of incarceration, 3 years of supervised release. For what? For an NDA? Because I didn't want the world to find out. He didn't want the world to find out about the relationship with Stormy Daniels? Seriously? The only reason that NDA ultimately became a legal issue is because he won the presidency. Funny, if you think about it, as I watch television now and I see the things that Trump does, there is no doubt in my mind, Trump of then and Trump of now are 2 totally different Trumps. He would have shut this thing down 1, 2, 3. The same way he's doing things right now. And what's interesting is how he's doing it. He's actually using folks like Pam Bondi. He's using folks like, whether it's Kash Patel or Elon Musk.
When you talk about Elon Musk, is he going to have this similar day that you had? Is there a time when Elon's going to go, what just happened?
The answer is an emphatic yes. And I suspect it's not just going to be Elon Musk. I suspect it's going to be an entire group of them, very similar to like what happened in the first administration, because Donald truly cares about one person and one person only. It's Donald J. Trump.
And so what advice would you give to people working in the White House?
My advice to them, look at history. You know, there's an old adage that history repeats itself. History repeats itself, especially in this world of Trumpism. We saw it with the tariffs from the first administration. We saw it with individuals that were within his orbit. That's what I suspect you're going to see a lot of. The next 2 years for Trump and the folks that are inside is going to be very ugly. And I don't want it, Charlie, can I say one last thing here? I don't want to see Trump or this administration fail. And people say to me, how could you say something like that? I do not. I don't agree with his policies. I am fundamentally opposed to many of the things that they are doing. He is the president of the United States, and I respect the office of the presidency.
If you have a chance to talk to Donald J. Trump again, what would you say to him?
That's all I want to know. Why? Who told you this would be a good thing for you to do? And why did you let it happen? It was unnecessary. You realize that if I never testified, he never would have been charged with any of the crimes that he ultimately was indicted on.
You've been listening to RCP contributor Charlie Stone in conversation with Michael Cohen. You can hear and see more of Charlie's interview series on RealClearPolitics.com. It's good stuff and worth checking out. And that will do it for today's program. I'm Andrew Walworth, and on behalf of Carl, Tom, Charlie, and all of us here at RCP, thank you for listening, and we'll be back here again on Monday. Have a great weekend.